universe. Where are you from?
I am from Dallas, Texas, that broad area, specifically a place called Mesquite, Texas, which is like 20 minutes east of Dallas.
And what is remarkable about Mesquite, Texas?
Nothing is remarkable about Mesquite, Texas. When I was in eighth grade, I moved from Mesquite to a place called Rockwall, which is like 15 minutes down the road. More remarkable about Rockwall is like it was on the lake. It was a totally different kind of community than Mesquite. And so Rockwall is really where I kind of think more of home as. But it was a nice town. Had a lot of friends there. Big church that we all went to. It was fun.
And how did you end up at the University of Arkansas?
I ended up at the University of Arkansas because I could not afford many of the other places that I had thought I wanted to go. My brother went to SMU, and so being from Dallas, I thought I wanted to go there. And I realized how much it costs, and I was like, there's no way in the world I'm doing that. And I looked at Ole Miss and Alabama, and both of them were more expensive than what I could afford. And at the time, I don't know if Arkansas is still doing it, but they gave in-state tuition to residents of Texas that had test scores of a certain school.
Yeah,
and so
I think we still do that.
yeah, which I think is the smartest thing that the University of Arkansas does, because for guys like me that were looking for a good school, great culture in the South, Southeast, with good sports, it was the most affordable and like economical option for me.
Yeah, SEC football, right?
Absolutely, and at the time we were pretty dang good.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Less the case today, but
So, what did you think you were gonna get in Fayetteville, and what did you actually get?
ooh, that's a great question. I thought I would get a good education. I did that. I thought that it would help me to land a job. I didn't know where that would be, Arkansas or Texas. Um, I would say for the most part, what I expected or came to Arkansas to do, I was able to achieve that, and I think my expectations were probably both met and exceeded. Just looking back on like what I thought as a senior in high school.
Yeah. And what were, I guess, so if exceeded, what were the like surprises or
Yeah,
like
I mean,
exceeding?
the reality is I had never been to Arkansas before I visited second semester of senior year of high school. So I didn't know what Arkansas was. I didn't know that it was as beautiful as it was, that it had as much to offer, because it was just an unknown place. And so I think just from a geographical region perspective, it holds a special place in my heart that I've always tried to find ways to incorporate it back into my life because of how greatly it exceeded expectations, probably. So,
Right. So that's where we are, right? We're in Bentonville, but Northwest Arkansas. So obviously it didn't suck that bad.
That's right.
So you got what you needed out of your education. This was one of the questions from the students. So what courses, the actual class content that you got in your undergrad do you still use on a regular basis? I think that's a thing, right? Like, I'm never going to use this again. I just have to take it to like graduate.
So that's a good question. There are some that are more useful than others. I'll tell you, my attitude in college, which was not the right attitude, was how can I go to class, make friends with colleagues or classmates, get an A, but like do as little work as possible, which meant that I wasn't learning all the things that I could have. Which that strategy works until you look back and you really wish that you had learned the things that you knew that the teacher was talking about, but you actually didn't commit the work to actually learn those things. So I'll say like the classwork that I think back and wish I had learned more about would be the technical aspects of financial modeling and the financial analysis stuff, because conceptually you can figure out a lot of that stuff. The actual action of going in and using Excel as a tool to help you figure out forecasts and projections and things like that, that's stuff that if you don't learn it early, then you're end up gonna have to learn it later, and the earlier you learn it, the more efficient you can be in those years in between. So I think dedicating the time up front, even though it's abstract, it doesn't mean much to you at the time, a lot, if you're a finance major like I was, that is a skill set that is highly desirable and will make you faster, better, stronger at your craft, which is financial analysis and whatnot. Another thing, portfolio management and fixed income are two classes that Dr. Rennie was teaching at the time. I think he's still doing that. Those were very valuable to me just because it gave me exposure to a topic or asset classes in finance is what we call it
Yeah.
that I hadn't had exposure to before. So I use those all the time. So those are probably the three as a finance major I would say spend a lot of time honing and learning.
Yeah, I can certainly speak from like people who've been my analysts, like in the past. Somebody who's like an Excel wizard is invaluable because
No doubt.
it just cuts out so much time. And I found myself, I mean, I'm a coder, I'm a programmer, like, but Excel's not my thing. And I would sit and like just dictate to my analyst Joel because he's so fast.
Yep.
Instead of trying to like do it myself and whatever, which for me was really frustrating because I would have rather been able to do it by myself.
Yep.
Yeah. So what was your first job out of school?
First job out of school. So I was a senior. I'm going to tell you how I got this job. Well,
yeah.
I'll tell you how I got the job and then I'll lead into like what that job was. So I was a senior year, second semester. I had interviewed with like all these different companies. And one incentive that the reason I was interviewing with a lot of these, A, I wanted a job, but B, I had never really traveled. Like growing up, I couldn't travel. And so, not because I couldn't travel, it's just I didn't have the funds necessary to buy the plane ticket to go travel.
Yeah.
And so, these companies, like there was one in Portland, Oregon. And I was like, that'd be sweet to go visit Portland. And there was one like in Colorado and there was one in Austin. So anyway, I pretty much just was like, I want to interview with all these firms. Perhaps they'll give me a job, but I'll also get to like experience what that place is.
City.
And I got to miss class and it was like an excused absence. So that was
Yeah.
really cool. So anyway, second semester, I had a couple offers, worked at Walmart the summer before, had an offer there, was looking to not do something in retail, wanted to do something more finance. Sent a cold LinkedIn message I typed in like, I wanted to work for a bank, a financial institution. So I typed in like financial analyst, Dallas, JP Morgan, go. And so it gives you this list of like a bunch of people that work at JP Morgan and Dallas. And so I like copy and pasted like the same, I somewhat personalized it to these people and said, hey, I would love to talk to you about what you do. It's like a month before graduation. Somebody's like, oh, this is timely. Like we've already hired all of our people, but somebody just quit. So we had a call with them and then he forwarded my resume to the HR person. So literally like 3 weeks before graduation is when I got my job at JP Morgan working in their private bank, which is essentially wealth management. And so I went and did that. Went to New York for like 2 months that summer, got trained, and then went to Dallas to work full time.
Yeah. And did you intend to be back in Dallas sort of all along? Like was your hope to land back in Dallas?
I think so. I called Dallas home and that's kind of where I've wanted to invest professionally. And so I think that was always the goal. But I was open to working at Stevens and Little Rock, and I looked at stuff all over the place. And frankly, would have gone to Portland, Oregon to work if the offer was good enough. It just really wasn't what I was looking to do.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, though, is this question of like, how do you balance what you want to do and where you want to be? I think when I was a kid, it was definitely for me like where I wanted to be. And in hindsight, that could have been slightly short-sighted. It ended up working out fine, but I think there is often a decision point of like, is it the perfect job or is it the perfect place? It's hard to find, a little bit of both, but it sounds like being back in Dallas was right for you and the job was cool.
Yes, it was. Yes, I would agree with all that.
And what did that job look like? Like, what did you do every day as a first-year analyst at JP Morgan?
Yeah, that's a really good question because when I was interviewing for that job, and when I talked to the person I reached out to on LinkedIn, I didn't know what the private bank was. I just knew JP Morgan was a great firm, and I would be lucky to have a job there. And they don't usually recruit from Arkansas, so it was like I was kind of sliding in the back door. But I thought they were like a private equity firm for JP Morgan. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Private equity sounds fun. I've heard a lot of cool things about it. What they actually did was the private bank works, it's like wealth management. So if you have amassed a wealth of, my particular group was like a couple hundreds of millions up to a couple tens of billions of dollars, they would go to a bank like JP Morgan and say, hey, I've made all this money. I've sold my company. What should I do with it? Like, should I be invested in stocks, or should I be invested in bonds, or should I be buying real estate? And so we would help advise families and individuals that had sold their business and made a ton of money on what to do with that money after you've made it. And so what that job in practice looked like as a first year analyst was getting there at like 6:30 in the morning, wearing my suit and tie, and learning how to like look professional, which maybe I learned a little bit of that in college, but it was really JP Morgan that taught me like how to look and fit into that environment in banking. And then I'd leave the office usually around midnight. I'd order food at the office about 8 o'clock. The firm would pay for it, so that was cool. And I didn't really see many friends, worked most weekends. So it was like heads down for like 3 years of just work. But I learned a ton, and I met an immense amount of really wealthy, but really more interesting people. And so that's kind of what that job looked like over the span of 3 years.
And other than potentially a bad back, what do you feel like you sort of took out of that experience?
Couple
and
things.
then what did you do next?
Yes, definitely have a bad back, and I would say any analyst that has to sit for years just kind of hunkered over doing models, you'll have a bad back. But I learned a couple things. First, there's a million different ways to make a ton of money, which is super cool because I've always been interested in entrepreneurship, always been interested in like owning businesses, and so to get there and see firsthand from some of the most successful people, like you can do it all kinds of ways. You can do it, in Texas, a lot of people make their money in energy and in real estate. Then like you'd have some guy out in East Texas that had a sign company and he sold it for like $100 million, and you're like, a sign company? Like, what's so good about your sign? But these people, you realize that you don't have to be the smartest person. You have to hustle. You have to be like really good at what you do, but that can look all kinds of different ways. And so,
and don't be an asshole.
And don't be an asshole. That's right. Well, we actually had some very wealthy assholes, but generally speaking, the ones that I liked or wanted to be like, they were not assholes. So, but I took that away.
Even the harsh ones, there has to be some people component of
that's right. Well, so, and what I'll tell you is what I took away from that was that what people can't take away from you, aside from your skill set, like nobody can take away your ability to model financially, but like your relationships, which worked really well for me because I've always loved investing relationally into people, is that like nobody can take those from you. And if you work really hard to build relationships and like cultivate them, like that's the most fun part about life and or business. And what I learned at JP Morgan was like, I was put into a stratosphere of folks that have done really well, but they're humans too. And so at a young age, 22 years old, I would like send an email to Mr. Guy that made all kinds of money and was like, hey, I'd like to learn more about how you grew that business. Like, could I take you to coffee? And because I wasn't selling a product or telling them what stock to buy, but I was like asking them about their life, these people would say yes to meeting with me and say no to meeting with like my boss's boss.
Sure.
Right. So I think what I took away from it was like, you can have all the money in the world and still be human. It's super important not to just sit down and do analytical work for 3 years, but like have your head up and say, what do I want to take from this job? Not what does this job want to take from me? Because had I just sat down, hunkered down 3 years, honing my financial modeling skills, which maybe I'd be a better financial modeler, I wouldn't have these fruitful relationships that will continue to help me throughout life. And that would have been a missed opportunity. So what I would challenge people is just like, what do I want out of this job? For me, it was to learn a lot, but to meet a lot of people that could change the trajectory of my life. And I think I was able to do that, but only because I knew what I wanted out of it. If I had just gone to work every day in my suit and tie and had no idea, it'd have been challenging to think to ask that guy to go to coffee or lunch or whatever.
Only bankers and lawyers still wear suits, right?
Yeah, oh my gosh. and like it was fun at first, like you feel important in your suit and tie, and then after 3 years you're like, oh my gosh, this is some kind of terrible. So today I don't wear suit and ties. Sometimes it feels nice to dress up, but I try to stay away from them.
Yeah. So what was next? So you left JP Morgan.
So the analyst program is 3 years long, and it was important to me that I fulfilled that commitment of completing the analyst program, because for me it was like I felt like JP Morgan took a chance on a kid from Arkansas and gave him a job. And so there were many times that I had either been offered to go do something else or really wanted to go do something else because it was not always the most fun. But I finished that, and the way it works is you finish your program, and then there's a program what they call A to A, which is called analyst to associate. It's like you had to re-interview for the opportunity to become associate. So did that. My goal, if I was to stay at JP Morgan, was to move to New York and work on Wall Street, because it's like, if you're going to be in finance, go, get your badge of honor, go say you worked on Wall Street. So that was always my goal. And I got an offer to go do just that, doing the same thing I was doing in Dallas, but like for global families. So like big global families and not just regionally focused big families. And then a client of the bank, at the same time I'm going through that process, a client of the bank who had made bukus of money in credit card processing of all things, asked that I help him to launch a family office with focusing on private investments. And at the time I was 25 years old, and the job that he was wanting to hire me for was far greater than really what, in my opinion, my qualifications justified. But he wanted me to be the guy to help do what he was wanting to do next, was to build out a family office, which I can tell you all about what that means, but to go invest money into different things. And so I decided to leave JP Morgan, go launch a startup family office for a very wealthy family in Dallas, and did that for a number of years and had a ton of fun.
Yeah, but though it was somebody else's thing, not yours, that is an entrepreneurial venture in so much as you still have to find a space.
Oh yeah.
Put the phone system in.
I remember.
Hire the secretary.
I remember that. Well, I didn't even get to hire a secretary. So the way it worked was the first day of work, I was throwing some keys and was like, okay, here's the office space. Your office is there. Nobody else was in the office. And then the computers had not yet been set up. And so I was like, all right, well, let me try to figure this one out. And so I remember spending, and I'm terrible at technology. I've already told you that. So I spent 2 hours just trying to figure out how to get the phone and internet set up, and then get my email made. But it was truly a startup, from having to create a website to figure out what the heck we were actually going to do, because effectively we had a big bucket of money that we wanted to go invest into things that produced more buckets of money. And
Right.
so, but there was no true strategy around how we were going to do that. It was just all right, let's go to work. And so I think the fact that I felt insecure is probably the best word to use. I felt like I was out of my league. I felt like I wasn't qualified for that job. So it motivated me to work very hard and to fake it until I made it, which is ultimately what I did for a long time. But I think that worked to my advantage in some way. Maybe not my psyche,
Right.
but it made me run really fast and really hard because I felt like I didn't belong there, which is the same feeling I felt at JP Morgan, by the way. Being from Arkansas, being a small town kid in Texas, I just felt like I had something to prove, and that I think I've felt that most of my career. So anyway, long and short of it, that is kind of what that looked like after JP Morgan launching the deal. It was very much an entrepreneurial venture, but a ton of fun.
So I think for the students, it would be interesting to just have you sort of walk through what a family office is, because
Sure.
that's a world that is so particular
Yes.
that without some reason to have been around it and engaged, and my exposure to that was because I worked for the Clinton Foundation, and so that was an even weirder family office.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Sure.
But a lot of family offices were donors to the Clinton Foundation, so on the philanthropic, not-for-profit side I was involved. But a family office typically is
what? Yes. So a family office is effectively what you would call the office of a very wealthy family that has made so much money that they've decided to take the responsibility for what to do with that money in-house. So maybe if I make $100 million, maybe I, Aaron Pierce, feel equipped to go know what to do with that because I've got a great attorney, I've got a great accountant, and I'm really smart. But there's a point at which you made so much money that you don't want to outsource that to the attorney over there and the banker over there and the accountant over here. And a lot of it's a control thing. A lot of these people that grow businesses and have the success they do, they generally have control problems. But they like to, instead of have somebody at JP Morgan doing it, they want to have somebody working at, the Pierce family office doing it, right? And so a family office in its most simple form is a team of people that all work for the family rather than working at the bank and the family's a client.
Yeah.
And so they can do everything from trust and estates work, making sure that everything is structured in a way that generationally the wealth is transferred the way that the patriarch or matriarch may want it to. They can do everything, investments, both stocks and bonds or alternative assets, private equity, real estate, things like that. Or philanthropy, which is like a whole nother thing that you know a ton about. And so a family office is the collection of those things brought in-house, working just for a family instead of like a bank like JP Morgan.
Yeah. And so in sort of doing that, I'm sure that as a finance guy, you had plenty of time looking at, the markets. But what you've sort of redirected to is more direct private investment. So I want to talk about that. And the students are very interested in kind of how you evaluate a private company. But before we do that, somewhere along the way with all these relationships, you got involved and helped put up this Venture Dallas thing. Mm-hmm. What is that? Sure. How did that come to be?
Okay. I will touch on Venture Dallas and then I'll kind of say how it came to be. Actually, I'll start flip-flop. I'll start with how it came to be and then exactly what it is. So at the family office, started with no strategy. We formed a strategy. We wanted to go invest in earlier stage companies. And my preference was Texas-based companies because they were closer to home and easier to find. And the stage at which we were looking for is what they call like seed to Series A. That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but just broadly speaking, that's the stage these companies were in. Usually they were doing like sometimes less than $1 million in revenue, sometimes less than $5 million in revenue. And we were looking to invest in those companies to help them grow to a place that, if we invested whenever they were valued at like $5 million, we wanted to go sell them for like $50 million, which $50 million is not like an insane number. Like it's an insane number, but it's not $50 billion. And you can sell companies for $50 million, and it's not the craziest thing in the world. So we were investing in early stage companies. Through that process, I became known as like the venture guy, and I was really good at going and finding deals and having people come to me and say, "Hey, I'm raising money," which, by the way, like there's a ton of people raising money for all sorts of ventures, and so I was just kind of like the loudest and most visible, and so a ton of deals came my way. And through that, we kind of developed this group of venture investors, and it was a small group. There was like 7, maybe 8 of us in Dallas or Texas broadly. And we would share a lot of deal flow and say, "Hey, have you seen this founder? Like, he's a really sharp guy. You should look at him. Not a fit for me, but maybe good for you." So there was one time we're sitting at a meeting at a place called Old Parkland in Dallas, and there's myself and like 7 others, and somebody brought up the question like, why don't we have a big conference, like a better way to highlight and showcase companies here locally, like what they're doing, in hopes to get them funding from people both in Dallas but like the rest of the nation. So Venture Dallas started as a conversation in a boardroom at Old Parkland with like a couple of investor friends, and then we said, okay, who would anybody here be willing to help put on a conference to go do what we had just talked about? And like a few of us raised our hands. So we came together and said, let's throw a big conference. 2019 was the first year we did it, and we invited like 100 and something companies to come meet with 200 plus investors, some of which were venture capital funds, some of which were family offices or angel investors. But it was just a place where we had folks like Ross Perot Jr. talk, and Emmett Smith came and joined, and Bill Nye the Science Guy was there. So pretty much what we did was we said, how can we leverage our relationship, invite all the companies we know, invite all of our investor friends, and then try to go as high up in our network to get people there with the sole purpose of like elevating these companies and showcasing what they're doing, because like the biggest thing is they need capital. Like they may have a great idea, but without capital they can't implement it. And so it was just a small group of people that got really fired up about how can we help the ecosystem broadly. And so Venture Dallas is a 501c6, a nonprofit organization, and the whole like nobody gets paid. It's totally an act of love, just to shine a light on the great companies in Dallas and Texas broadly, but we kind of focus on Dallas, and invite investors from all over the nation to come take a look at what's happening.
And how do the kids in Dallas play with the kids in Austin?
They play well. I would say the kids in Dallas and Houston actually don't play as well. Just there's like in Texas, it's this weird dynamic of like everybody's cool with Austin. Austin's kind of weird and fun and cool, and everybody enjoys going to Austin. But like if you're born in Houston, you like are born with this Dallas is not cool mentality. Yeah. And then if you're born in Dallas, you know Houston's not cool. and then if you travel there, you're like, oh, it's so hot and muggy. And so it's really funny. Like I would say Texas collectively is growing, and we're trying to grow it to be like one market. So when people think of Texas, they think of the whole state rather than Dallas and Austin and Houston being totally separate, which they actually are totally separate. But we try to elevate Austin companies and Houston companies as well as Dallas. And we kind of think of it all as one thing because we want people to outside of Texas to say, wow, there's a ton happening in Texas. Not there's a ton happening in Austin or a ton happening in Dallas. We want it to kind of be regionally focused as the whole area. But that's kind of how the relationship is between Austin, Houston, and Dallas.
Yeah, well, you know, I spent 10 plus years in Boston, and in Boston, Massachusetts, the only thing anybody knows about Texas is Austin.
Interesting.
Because we have a lot of people, and I think, you know, this is an interesting thing happening in markets generally right now. People who want to leave Boston and New York, it's like this migrant community of like, well, you can go to only a handful of places in the country. San Francisco, LA, and Austin, Texas.
That's interesting, and it makes you wonder.
Maybe
like, how did Austin...
Miami if you do something very particular, but otherwise, Austin somehow has become
a hub.
In the healthcare space, particularly, you know, like, well, people like to live there, and the weather's good, and the weather in Boston, of course, is terrible.
Sure.
So,
yeah, Austin has been booming. And it's super interesting. You see all these tech companies that are kind of going to Austin. I think Tesla's opening up space there. It's really cool. And I think the reason for it is you have large success stories that have come out of Austin, namely Dell and Dell Technologies. And so I think the biggest thing that like markets or ecosystems need is like one big success that makes a bunch of people a bunch of money. Thus, they go and create new things or invest that money locally. And then new companies go on and have great success. And so like that's why you have Silicon Valley. It's just like these companies make a bunch of money in tech, they throw it back in tech, those guys rise. And so in Austin, they've had some great successes, probably Dell being the biggest. I'm sure there's more. Dallas has had some, but not maybe to the scale of that. And so I think that's what a lot of these emerging markets need. I would put Northwest Arkansas in the same boat. And once you have that, it becomes a thriving kind of ecosystem. But Austin has benefited greatly from technology and companies growing really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, there used to be these flights, you know, and like in and out of Austin from San Francisco and Boston and New York, and it's like being on the school bus. Like you see all the people you already know who you're like going back and forth with. That's and it's a very funny thing, especially for me. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and like, you know, all I ever knew about Texas was I had an aunt who lived in Houston, and it was awful. And like I didn't want to go anywhere near. It was like the only place hotter and more miserable in the summer than Eastern Kentucky was Houston, Texas, and that's the only time we ever went to visit. It's like, oh God, could we not go here in the winter?
I gotta imagine Houston's probably good at some point in time. I've just never been there at a point that it was. I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, I'm sure it is.
Maybe the rodeo. Like I think they've got rodeo season, great concerts.
They do have a really good rodeo. I've been to the rodeo, but it is in the fall or the spring. It's not in the summer. But okay, so you start this family office. It takes off. You do the things you do. You're at some point looking at these venture companies. This is an entrepreneurship class. So there's a handful of people who have already started businesses. There are people who think they want to do that someday. There are people like you who want to sit on the finance side and be the people who choose the businesses. But at some point, you had to come up with your thesis of like, Okay, so between seed and A round, which we can talk more in class about what that is, but these are the sort of stage. But then now I've still got 50 to choose from, and I'm gonna pick
Yeah.
5.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that. So I think I saw like 850 deals that were like sent directly to me that I spent time on. There was many more that were sent to me that I didn't spend time on, but and that resulted in like 8 total investments made. So your
1%.
ratio, yeah.
Less
So
than 1%.
so less than 1% is usually, and so there's an element of how quickly can you get 100 deals to find that one that's actually worth investing in. Now, I guess if you're really good, you can attract 10 for every 100 you get, but that wasn't my experience. So the question is, how did I find the ones to invest in, or how did I think about it? That's a really good question. There's not a science to it. For me, what I knew was I had a big job at an early age, and I didn't want to screw it up, and it was a lot of money. And so I was like, okay, I have not done this, but I know there are people out there that have done this. How can I go learn from those people that have done this and align myself very closely with the ones that have done this the best? And so I called any and every gray-haired guy in Dallas and Texas. I was meeting with people in Houston and Austin, and like, so tell me what you've done. Tell me what you've learned. How do I be great at this? Because I really want to be great at it. And I was surprised how many people were willing to take a meeting with me, which was the same experience I had at JP Morgan, which is the same one I had in college. Like, you always discount people's willingness to help if you ask for it.
You have to ask.
You have to ask for it. And by the way, students, like, do it now. Everybody loves and feels good about helping college people. And you guys are like trying to find your way in life, and we all remember that time. So like, do that. It's like a card that once you're out of college, you can't really use it unless you go back to college. So like, use the card and use it all day, every day. Yeah. On LinkedIn, on email, to your uncle, everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So I try to align myself with people that were way smarter than me. I did that. The first deal I ever did, I was investing alongside Mark Cuban Companies. It was a company that was in the third-party logistics space, which means they ship, pick, pack, and ship all of the products for these consumer goods companies. So think companies on Shark Tank. If you watch CNBC and Shark Tank, there'll be a company that's selling this little widget, and then they have a website. And so when you buy it on their website, for a long time they're shipping it, and all of a sudden they start shipping a ton of product, and they need somebody to do that for them. So this company did that.
And that space is called like a
3PL. 3PL. So third party logistics, supply chain management, all, you can kind of put it in a lot of different buckets. But my thought was, this is my first deal that I've ever done. This is Mark Cuban's like 1,000th deal, maybe even millionth deal. I don't know how many deals this guy's done, but he's seen a deal or two. And if he's doing it and he uses it for companies that he's invested in, perhaps this makes sense. And so I did that, and I aligned myself with somebody that I look up to and think is really smart, and that worked out really well. And then I did that again and again and again for a number of different investments that I may not have been the expert. Matter of fact, there may not have been one investment that we made where I could have sat there and confidently said, I am the expert on this. Because not only was I not an expert, I was just like too young to even have the experience or knowledge base to be an expert. And so I did that over and over and over, but it wasn't just like blindly like, I'm going to follow that guy. Like, it's okay, using that as a signal to say, I should probably spend time on this one. And then digging in and figuring out, okay, what are they doing in sales? What are they doing in revenue? Are they profitable? Most times they weren't. And the question is like, is there a point at which it's going to be profitable? Like, it's okay if it's not profitable today, but like, how close are we? And what's the plan to get there? Because like, my thesis was not like, hey, let's give them money today and then keep giving them money forever. Like, we wanted at some point the company to give us back money. And so, and from a valuation perspective, which I think you touched on it earlier, and so I'll just kind of jump into how I did it. There's not a science to it. It's more of an art, but the reality is like, the value of a company is what somebody's willing to pay to either invest in or buy that company. So what we would have, like a lot of times in Dallas or even in Austin, they would say, okay, I'm raising $1 million at a $5 million valuation, and that's the deal. And I would say, okay, like, I would always ask questions like, oh, how'd you come up with that? Like, just interested to hear him talk. And I said, well, that's market. For companies that are doing about what I'm doing in revenue and about what I'm doing in users, and that's market. And I was like, that's interesting because, and they would say, all Silicon Valley Bank or this large institutional West Coast firm publishes a report, and it says it's market. And I was like, well, that's really interesting because what's market for Silicon Valley is actually quite different than what's market for Dallas, and it's different than what's market for Austin and Northwest Arkansas and New York. And so what I learned was like market, there's no such thing as market. Like market is what somebody's willing to give you. And so you can say like the market rate on, a Series A company is this, but like if nobody's willing to give you $1 million to buy 20% of your business, then that in fact is not market, and market is much lower. And so that's this really interesting thing that like entrepreneurs are like, this is market. Investors are always like, maybe it is market, but perhaps it's not. And then usually the right answer is somewhere in the middle, which was always fun to figure out where market value of a company was.
Well, I think that's an important point because, we collectively all say this a lot, but like it's about the deal. I'm a deal guy, whatever. One of the students yesterday was, what does this deal thing mean? And so it's that, right? It's the, what is the business? What is the rate at which you're investing for what percentage? What's your, expectation in terms of return?
Mm-hmm.
That's the deal.
Yep.
Right? It's like, what kind of deal are you going to give me for my money?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it means whatever it means in the context, right? It's like, well, deal is whatever you and I figure out it is.
That's
right?
Exactly right.
I'm the founder. I'm the startup team. I'm the one who has this thing that I'm selling you. It's transactional like everything else, and it's a negotiation. And it is incorrect to assume that there is a deal because the deal's different every time the deal gets done.
Yes.
And I think sometimes that gets lost.
Yeah, and I think it gets lost on even people in my profession, like being in the deal business or being in private equity or whatever, even venture. It's like, I went into this thinking there was a way that deals are supposed to look, but the reality is like every deal is different. Some may have similar characteristics of the other one and some go more smoothly, but like the deal is whatever works for you and whatever works for you. And if y'all can come to an agreement on what that is, and sometimes like I need more percentage of your company, or sometimes like I need to write a larger check, or sometimes like I need these protective rights to make sure that you don't go get a bunch of debt and put it on the business, like, and so the deal can look 100 different ways. But like a deal is the same thing as like when you go to the car dealership or when you go buy something from someone. It's like there's usually a lot of wiggle room. And my whole life I've always tried to figure out how much wiggle room there was, even like at random places that you would not think you could strike a deal. I was always trying to like figure out like, could I get this for half off? And they're like, no, it's not half off. I'm like, oh, just checking. Like maybe there's a deal to be had. And so I think it's just important to remember like deals are exactly what you think they are. Like you go to the store and you get a deal. Like that happens in life all the time, and it's fun. Like just try to poke around and figure out where there might be a deal.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that like, I tend to be overly quantitative and concrete, and part of what I learned in my own business experience was like nothing works that way. I'm like, but the math says, and that's not how the world works. And I think that sort of point of you don't know if you didn't ask. So if you didn't push on it, then you don't know for sure what's behind that door, if you didn't poke at it.
Oh yeah, I've made a living of asking just to see. Like, and sometimes you get a good answer, sometimes you get a bad answer. But like my friends will tell you, like this guy is like, Aaron, you are always like fantasy football. Like I'm trying to trade this guy for that guy, and people are like, why would I ever do that? It's like, I don't know, just check and see if you would. Like, and so anyway, it's something that's always been a part of me, and I enjoy the hunt for a deal. I like the wiring it to make it be a good deal for both sides, and then I like ultimately making money is the fun part, but like I enjoy the process of it, and the hunt is probably my favorite part of it.
So how long has it been since the first family office investment?
I had it at 12.
Oh, sorry.
But just let me know whenever you start.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, we're gonna take a break, and I'll turn it back on in a second. Oh, it died somewhere along the way. Anyway, how long since your first investment in the family office?
Let's see. Our first one we launched in July.
Okay, so we had to have a quick venue change there, but so since your initial sort of family office investments, how many of them have sort of had time to like grow into something other than a seed to A?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So we launched the family office in July of 17. Made our first investment in like November of 2017. And at the stage at which you're investing, usually these startups take like, you know that it's going to take them about 5 years to get to where you're hoping that they one day get to. And you know, if it's 2020 today,
right.
We made our first one at the end of 17. We're at like 2 years plus something's changed. So they've grown, but none of them have been able to reach fruition to the place that like we hope that they get to.
Of course, yeah.
But I mean, there are companies that were doing $1 million whenever we invested in them, and they'll finish this year at like 20 million in revenue. So like
they're on track.
Yeah, they're doing what you would hope or expect to, but we also have some that like we would have thought really strongly whenever we were investing that they were gonna like go that way, and they kind of went this way and then that way. So it's not a perfect science, but we've had some that have been great, and then others that were impacted by things like COVID or the trade Trump war with China and all this stuff.
So that's a good point. One of the sort of sets of questions from the students was like, how has COVID and quarantine and the change of sort of travel patterns and, you know, in this very kind of relationship heavy world, how has that changed? Has that changed the way you think about businesses?
Yeah. So there's kind of two aspects of that question. So the first, if we had invested in 8 companies at the family office, there was a few that were actually very well positioned for a global pandemic. One of which was like a on-demand urgent care and telehealth platform. So that worked well. And that grew like 5 times during COVID, and it was already doing well before. So were you lucky? Did you invest in a platform that was well positioned for a world that more things are digital? But whatever the case is, probably luck. That's great. We had another one, the third-party fulfillment, selling a bunch of e-commerce products. As more things are gone online instead of the physical store, they've skyrocketed. So there was a number that COVID was really bad for a lot of businesses, but it was really good for other businesses. Like look at Zoom, look at DocuSign, look at like as these people had these visions to build these technologies that could exist and make things more efficient. If you couldn't be there in person, they really thrived. And so anyway, a number of our investments did very well. And then how has my job changed? I think you like kind of have to be an entrepreneur in your own right and say, okay, the world has changed. How am I going to like innovate or figure out a way to be successful given the current state of the union? And so you're calling people, you're Zooming people, you're waiting until you feel comfortable first and foremost, and then other people may feel comfortable to grab a cup of coffee sitting on different ends of the conference room. Like it's been a fun thing to navigate, but at times it was terrible. I mean, I am a social person. I feed off the energy of just meeting people and hearing their story, figuring out how we can help each other. And for months, I wasn't able to do that in person. And I can tell you, I remember telling Kelsey, my wife, I was like, I don't know what depression is. I've heard about it. I don't know anything about it. But I'm feeling things that feel like it could be
that.
A depressed thing. But it was because it was like I didn't have that thing that fires me up and gets me energized.
Totally.
And so anyway, there's been a lot of adjustment in how I ultimately go out and find those opportunities, but it wasn't easy. It's getting more easy by the day because more people are feeling comfortable in a responsible setting, you know, not sitting, you know, on top of each other.
Right.
But yeah, so the world did change, but like the world's always going to change. So you got to figure out like how are you going to win at the new game? The game's always changing, and if you're playing to win, like you can't get mad that the world changed. You got to figure out like how am I going to win in the new world.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I had to figure out, and I'm still working on it.
Right, like all those guys who like had invested in like installed network solutions that were like, oh, you have this big tower in your office space, and then Amazon Web Services kind of like made that not a thing anymore, right? So there's always a thing
Yep.
that is sort of constantly evolving and changing the things that we thought were sure bets, and then not
Yeah.
so much.
And one thing I learned is like, you just have to be playing the game. Like you can't win if you're not playing. Said another way, like if we had never deployed any capital from our bucket of money into these early stage companies that were losing money, one of which a telehealth platform, one of which shipping a bunch of products for people, like if you're not willing to take that risk, then you can't benefit from whenever it skyrockets up. And so I think one thing that I've learned is like, you can't win if you're not playing. So go play, whatever that means to you. Whether it means start your business, whether it means buy a stock, whether like whatever that means to you, like play. Because you can't win if you're not playing. And if you're on the sideline just watching, like you're just gonna watch everybody else play, and some are gonna win, some are gonna lose. But like
Right.
you don't get to win. So if you're playing to win, you gotta play.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So you've had a relatively recent job shift.
Yes.
What's that about?
So, thank you for asking. So, really, what I'm doing today is a continuation of what I was doing for a very wealthy family, but doing it in a more entrepreneurial way that fits more with what fires me up. Like, as you noted earlier, the family office was a very entrepreneurial venture because it was nothing and I had to make it something. And what's great about those ventures usually is like you own the equity, or you know, if you start a business from the ground up, like you own that business. So if you create value, that value is distributed to you. If you go do that, but somebody else owns all the equity, it's, well, you're doing it for different reasons. And so for me, I've always known like I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Even before I knew what entrepreneurship was, I was like selling candy at the school, getting in trouble. Like I've always done that. I've never known that it was like entrepreneurship. It was just in me. Probably because I didn't have money and I always wanted money, and the only way to make money is to like sell something. So, but what I'm doing today at Tusk, Private Investment is the name of the firm, is the same thing I was doing at the family office, but doing it in a more entrepreneurial way, in which ultimately is more fun for me, because you know, whereas if you're working and you have an employer, the employer can say like, you know, today do this and tomorrow do that and tomorrow do that, and sometimes, especially in the family office world, like priorities shift, strategies shift, and you have to be agile. And so for me, it was just the thought of doing it in a more entrepreneurial way with great partners, of which I think I'm greatly aligned with. That felt more like the right place for me to be than where I was, but the job itself is very similar. Matter of fact, the exact same job, just doing it kind of in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you sort of have the opportunity to now set your own strategy and thesis, what are you looking at now? What are you interested in?
Sure.
In the Tusk world and platform?
So, a couple things. So, first off, Tusk is a business in which we are looking for opportunities to use capital to grow enterprises that ultimately return more capital than we invested to both us and our investors. So like in its most simple form, we are looking for great businesses that would love to partner with us because both they need capital to grow and they value the resources we can bring to bear, whether it be relationships, whether it be experiences, business expertise that we have actually been there, built that, and exited it. So that's kind of simply what we're looking for. They can look a couple different ways. So primarily what we are looking for is companies that are looking to sell their business for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's, I've had this business, I'm 75 years old, my son doesn't want to take over the business, or the grandkids don't want to take over the business, and there's no way to really monetize the value that I created in my lifetime. And so, going back to earlier, what's the market value of your business? Well, your market value is only what somebody's willing to pay for it. And if there's nobody there that's interested in buying these businesses, then that guy who's built something of great value can't actually enjoy that for the next 20 years of his life in retirement, whatever. So what we look to do is find interesting businesses, oftentimes are family owned, that have not maybe been professionalized in the same way that large enterprises have been, but they built a great business, and finding ways that we can both offer owners liquidity and like value that they built to not work as hard. And then we would go in and say, okay, how can we take this business from this level to this level?
Yeah.
You know, and some people are really good at building businesses from here to here, but like building them to there is actually, it's a different skill set. It's just a totally different thing. And so what we like to do is find great businesses, great people that want to partner with us to grow their business from here to here and kind of make money along the way. And so they, in some worlds they call that private equity. In other worlds they call it entrepreneurship through acquisition. Like you can call it whatever you want. Other worlds they call it just a deal. But we're looking for great businesses to go acquire controlling interest of, so that we can grow them and make money for both ourselves, investors that invest alongside us, and even the previous management team that's selling.
Sure. And when you think about like your, 5-year, 10-year plan, like
Ooh, that's good.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
When I grow up, I used to tell people when I was 25, working at the family office, like investing in companies and meeting with entrepreneurs and dealing in the world of capital and opportunity, I was like, if I had all the money in the world, I'd be doing exactly what I'm doing today, because it's so fun. Like you get to meet with these smartest people that have these really cool ideas. Oftentimes you have no idea what they're talking about, but you get to learn from them.
Yeah.
For me anyway, oftentimes I don't know what they're talking about. So I would say for me, I am doing what I believe I will always do. And if I had all the money in the world, I'd keep doing that, because it's not work, it's super fun.
Yeah.
And I'm always learning, I'm always meeting people, all of which are smarter than me, and that's fun. So what I believe is I will always be doing what I'm doing today at any age. And so my 5-year, 10-year plan is like, I hope I'm a lot better 5 years from now than I am today. And I hope I'm a lot better 10 years than I am 5 years from that date. And so for me, it's just continuing to build on the experience, grow relationships with people that are going to be good partners along the way. And hopefully over the course of 10, 20, 30 years, that world grows. Perhaps my wallet or my balance sheet will grow alongside that. But like, I just want to continue to hone the craft of finding great deals, good people, great businesses, executing and actually getting the deals done, which is actually really hard to both find and then move it through the process of actually like closing the deal. And then replicating that and having success over and over and over, like that's kind of my long-term goal. And early days, but that's the plan.
And just as like a sort of closeout, because I started this class by having everybody do the Enneagram.
Oh, that's great.
And talking about,
I love that.
how important I think it is to like start with like know yourself.
Know thyself.
Know thyself, and then regardless of what your business is, it's all about relationships and trust. At the end of the day, a relationship is how much do we trust each other and how much are we willing to exchange whatever because we trust each other. And that I don't think is typically a part of like mainstream business training.
Yeah. So the most important thing in life is relationships. The relationship that you have with your wife or your husband, your kiddos, the Lord, your colleagues. Like, relationships are super important. The most important thing. I think it's what will be the most fruitful over long periods of time. And so if I could implore anybody, you only have so much time on the earth, invest in relationships, because like that is the fun part. And that's kind of what makes up life. Like, we go to work and we do these jobs, but like if you don't have relationships with the people that you're transacting with, like that seems like a really empty thing. So for me, I think a lot of it was natural. I am a Enneagram 3, which if you're into that stuff, I think it says that you're very extroverted. You're always like go, go, go. You can't sit still. You talk real fast. And so all of those things help me to learn things I already knew about myself. But you can read about it and you're like, wow, I'm not just a crazy guy that can't sit still and is always going and creating and building and doing. But like you kind of read and you're like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm not crazy. And then what's cool is you look at like, for me, if I'm a 3 and my wife, Kelsey, is a 1, you can start to better understand what the relationship looks like between somebody that maybe isn't as go, go, go and maybe doesn't want to talk all that much. And you start figuring out how can we live together? How can we be the best partners and teammates for each other?
Right.
Based on the fact that you like these things, I like these things, I'm high level, you're really detailed. Like, how can we complement each other super well? But I think you can take that and you apply it to like your colleagues. I think it's like in business, you're going to have like a co-founder perhaps. And so understanding, look, they jive that way and they're not being mean when they say it, they're doing it that way. That's just kind of the way that they come across because their personality is type way. So I'm really glad to hear that you're doing the Enneagram thing. And I think it's been one of the most helpful things for me to know myself, to know my wife, and like even to know people that also are willing to take the exam and do all that stuff. So
yeah, and I think it's just a recognition that there's not like a right and a wrong way to do things necessarily. That we kind of come in all sorts of flavors,
right.
And at the end of the day, if you can put your own stuff in a box and sort of work on your own stuff and say, I'm going to find a way to relate to this person in a way that they understand it and they can hear it, you're going to get farther faster than trying to like make the world fit you.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed. 100%.
Well, thanks for your time.
For sure.
I appreciate doing this. The kids do. It's a great group of really smart, really talented, young, excited people who are going to go do interesting things. And like for me, the fun part of this is like I can't wait to see what they all go and do.
Me neither. And I'm glad that I like could do this. I would just say like as a final thought, like you never quite feel equipped to go do that thing.
Right.
Just like at 25, like I didn't feel like I was big enough to do that job, and I was, and I did it well, and it was great, and it was a good success. And so I would just encourage people, like, don't wait till you have experience to go do that thing, because nobody has experience until they do that thing. And so you can't win if you're not playing.
Right.
So go play, and don't worry about what you don't know. Like, align yourself with smart people, and just like go play. And by the way, if you go broke at 24 or 25 or 28 or 32, like you still have so much time to make that up.
Right.
And so be cool with being broke. Like if you're going to take that risk, and if that scares the heck out of you, probably don't take that risk. But I imagine all of your students are comfortable with risk that way. But anyway, so that's kind of a final thought.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's that understanding that like it's okay to fail. And like, I think culturally we're often taught that it's not. And actually it's fine.
Yeah.
And you're going to learn a lot from it. I don't know that I agree with the sort of people who are like, oh, you learn more from failures than successes. I don't know if it's more or less, but you certainly learn from both. And if you're going to fail, hurry up and do
fail
it
fast.
so you can move on
fail fast.
to the next thing.
Fail fast,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, thanks so much for letting me do this, and I hope they all go create businesses and
I know,
they look for
right?
capital, and then we can invest them.
I'm starving.
Me as